The journey to true wealth isn't about showing off the possessions that you have, but it's more about embracing the virtues of modesty and humility. We live in a world that often values appearances, especially on social media, but if you're able to stay grounded and keep a low profile, your bank account and your net worth will grow very fast. There are 5 reasons why I think looking poor is important, and starting with number 1 today, the fact that it simplifies your life. And to illustrate how simplicity will actually make you richer, imagine for a second that somebody gifts you a Lamborghini. For a moment, you're really stoked. You now get to show off this amazing car and you get all the respect that comes with owning a supercar. But then after driving it around for, let's say, a month or 2, you realize something. The cost to insure a Lamborghini is 5 times more than it costs to insure your standard car. You need to fill it up with premium gas when you go to the station, and the tires cost a fortune to replace. Every time you get an annual service, it costs you upwards of $1,500 to $2,000, and don't get me started on those certain replacement parts. You might have to wait months for those to come in. And all of these issues arose even though you got the Lamborghini for free. You didn't even actually have to pay for it in the first place, which I will get to in a second. Now, what I just described is actually a psychological phenomenon called the Diderot effect, named after a French philosopher, Denis Diderot. In his 1769 essay, he actually recounts that he is gifted a beautiful scarlet red dressing gown that eventually puts him into debt. And that's because to him, after he received the red gown, everything else that he owned kind of paled in comparison. He went on to replace all of his possessions, like his chair, his desk, and his wardrobe, and that eventually put him into debt. He famously stated that, quote, "The poor man may take his ease without thinking of appearances, but the rich man is always under a strain." In other words, more money, more problems. This is why looking poor is important, in my opinion. Not only does it simplify your life, it also allows you to enjoy the possessions that you do have, and oftentimes, if we're grateful with the stuff that we have already, the happier that we are going to be. And from a
So this makes a lot of sense. I think this seems to be a very popular topic. I find a number of videos that describe this like looking poor phrase. It's an interesting phrase that they're using, but I do agree with the sentiment, which is there's no real reason to try to pretend like you're something you're not, and or um, try to impress people with what you're wearing or what you have. Again, those people who are going to be impressed by those things are probably not the people that you want to be hanging out with. They likely are doing the same exact thing, which is they're probably trying to pretend that there's something that they're not. They are materialistic, and the moment that you don't have money or you don't have those things that are as shiny as their things, or you don't want to keep doing that, they're probably not going to be interested in you anymore. And so I think it does make sense. It obviously simplifies your life. It also reduces your lifestyle creep, I think is effectively what he's saying, which is the less things you have, the more modest they are, the less likely you are to continue to kind of keep creeping up. I think a big aspect of this is just being satisfied with what you have. I think even if you take it to an extreme example, like even a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk or even whoever is the richest person at the time, they also have to settle at some point. They don't have an infinite amount of money. Obviously, they have a lot of money and they can have most things, but they can't have everything. Even the richest person in the world doesn't have 100% of the wealth or over 50% of the wealth. So therefore, there's always going to be something they can't have inherently. And that's, I think, part of what it is to be human. We're always going to want things, but we're always going to never be able to get everything that we want or everything that is possible. And so at some point you have to ask yourself, like, when is enough enough? And start to be happy with what you have and who you are as an individual. And I think this is a good topic, even though I think the way it's phrased is potentially not really described in a positive connotation. But I do think it will bring a lot of true happiness, in my opinion, for other individuals if you stop caring as much about showing off with the fanciest clothes or jewelry or whatever it is, and just focus on more about what you have and being grateful for those things. I think are going to go and improve your life much more than any of those things ever would.
Financial perspective, every time you add on a recurring cost to your life, say an expensive car payment, that adds on to the day-to-day stress that you undergo to ensure that you can make that payment. When your month-to-month expenses get too high, this might actually chain you to the job that you do have, and if you don't enjoy your job in particular, this could be a bad thing. Your potential opportunities might be also limited, you may never experiment with entrepreneurship, and you might even be too anxious to look for a new job, all because you need to ensure that you have enough money to pay all your bills. If you intentionally choose to live a modest life instead, that gives you a bunch of flexibility and a ton of peace of mind. Reason number 2 why looking poor is important is that, well, it's simply cheaper. Because you aren't worried about buying a new designer shirt or getting a fancier car or buying the latest iPhone whenever it comes out, you have more money to invest, save, and also spend it on investing in yourself. The problem with many Americans is that whenever something new and shiny comes out, they go and buy it immediately. How many people do you know that have a completely adequate iPhone, but they want to upgrade it because the newest one has a cool new feature that they learned about in the most recent keynote by Apple? A recent survey showed that 65% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, so if you really want to avoid this situation, having the cheapest lifestyle possible will help you mitigate that risk. It's at a bare minimum, I think, a step in the right direction if you aren't being tempted by the newest or latest and greatest item that comes on the market. And that way, with those extra savings, you can save for the things that really matter in life. For example, the Scotty Cameron putter, Napa, California. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. It's just a joke. But for example, the things that really could matter are an emergency fund worth 3 to 6 months of your living expenses saved up. Perhaps you could start a retirement account, or you could spend it on things intentionally that will fulfill you. For example, maybe you save $500 a month by keeping a low profile. After 1 year, you have $6,000, which now you can use to either invest in yourself, perhaps you enroll yourself into more education, and that eventually makes you way more money later on. Or an extra $6,000 every year invested into the S&P 500 can be well worth over $500,000 in 25 years, which could be a huge difference for you and your life if you're willing to forego some of the material possessions day to day. Reason number 3 that looking poor is important is that it invites the right people into your life. A common problem that affects those that appear rich or portray a certain lifestyle is that the wrong type of person wants to be your friend, or the wrong type of person will have an expectation of you. So I remember a time that I was living in Hong Kong for a few months, and I was 24 years old at this time. I found myself going out one night with a bunch of expats, and one of them in particular, let's call him Tom, was from London, and you could just tell he loved the lavish lifestyle. On one night out in particular, he really wanted to buy a table at a local club. He wanted to go to a 5-star restaurant before the club, all while flaunting his new gold Rolex. And the worst part was that he expected all the people in the friend group to actually keep up with him. That means when I was randomly invited to hang out with this group, he expected me to be okay with splitting the cost of the table at the nightclub or the fancy dinner, which would have amounted to well over $500 US just for that night. And I'm 24 at this time. I'm unemployed between jobs. It's not like I have a ton of money to spare, so I politely declined. I just went home and I called it a night so I could avoid all of that. But then I was thinking to myself, what was the point of it all? It's possible that many of the other expats in that group wanted to keep up with Tom, so as a consequence, they all ponied up the $500 or whatever it was for that night. But my point is that when you seek to show off that you have money, you might get somebody like Tom in your life who encourages you to spend more money. Another situation is that you might attract people that want to get to know you just because they perceive that you have money. This is the wrong crowd in my opinion, because they don't truly want to get to know you. They just are there because at that exact moment you have what they're looking for. Now, if you were to live humbly and modestly, you might be able to find someone who values you for you and what you are truly about. Not only are you living a more authentic way, you are attracting people that want to be around you for your mind, your energy, and your presence. So looking poor is a really easy way to weed out the people that want to be your friend for the wrong reasons. And that leads me to a bonus reason today. Let's call it reason number 3.5 or 3.5, which is that you should aim to maintain a low profile because it doesn't make you a target. Imagine you brag about your cars, your watches, your houses, and your big portfolio on social media. Well, now you are someone who is known to have a lot of money, and it could potentially make you a target for robbery at some point in your life, or even worse, kidnapping, and that's just extra risk I would not rather invite into my life. Reason number
That seems pretty extreme. But maybe I haven't done any research on this, but I don't know too many social media stars that are getting kidnapped for them bragging about how much money they have. I assume most people hopefully know by now that I would say like probably 80-90% of the people that you see bragging about their wealth or how rich they are or how nice the things are that they own on social media are lying about it. They maybe bought something and returned it. Maybe they're standing in front of something that they don't own. This is a very common tactic that people have in order to portray themselves as being wealthy. And the actual rich individual likely won't do that. I'm sure there's a number of examples of folks like Mark Zuckerberg who wore a lot of the same clothing. Steve Jobs did the same thing. Warren Buffett, I think, stayed in his home from when he was a much younger adult all the way through to him being multi-billionaire. And so in most cases, those individuals who really have wealth don't really feel the need to flaunt it. They'll obviously spend it on things that they enjoy, but they're not doing those same activities that you see on social media in those cases.
For that keeping a low profile is a good thing is that you will soon realize that you can be happy with the stuff that you already do have. Oftentimes, I think we aren't grateful enough for the basic necessities that we have, for example, a bed to sleep in, access to food, and clean drinking water. There are so many countries out there that lack these basic resources, and by not overindulging, we can simply look at our life and be appreciative of the stuff that we have. Think about all the things that really matter to you at the end of the day. For me, it's my health, connecting with other people and being social, and having laughs with my friends. Then it just comes down to having a purpose with my work, having food and shelter, and then I'm pretty much ready to go. At the end of your life, you're not going to take any of the money with you, but you will remember all the great experiences life had to offer you, as well as all the connections that you made. And having this appreciation will help us avoid what researchers call the hedonic treadmill. That's the observed tendency of humans to return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive or negative changes in their life. So famously, in a study in 1978, lottery winners reported being similarly happy before and after winning the lottery. These winners were studied, and the findings actually showed that having a large monetary gain in their life had no effect on their levels of happiness after just a few months. It didn't make them any happier, they just simply got used to having more money, and their happiness level eventually returned to their baseline. In other words, if you go out and buy that Gucci belt that you've always wanted, sure, it will trigger some dopamine for you in the short term, but over a longer time period, you will just revert to your baseline level of happiness. I've also noticed personally the same phenomenon with a new car. So initially, once you get your new car, you are so happy to drive it. But after a few months, the newness or the honeymoon period fades away, and it's just like driving any other car. What you want to do is break this cycle and not get blinded by the newest, hottest items out there. Make the conscious choice to keep a low profile, and I think you will have a lot more peace of mind.
So just to expand on that a little bit, he highlighted the kind of positive case being less exciting. I think worth noting, I believe that a similar study was done, maybe part of that same one, where I think they also looked at individuals who were encountering things that weren't great. I think it was either something like veterans and or individuals who like lost a limb or something like that. And they also checked like their happiness levels over time. And again, those individuals eventually became as happy as any other individual given enough time. And so just because he's the positive example of winning the lottery and kind of not being as happy over time, I figured it was worth calling out that for any individual who's struggling at this point in time, also statistically speaking, you will feel much better, just as good as anybody else will be if you give it some time, give it a few months, give it a year. We as human beings will get back to a normal baseline. And so did also want to call out the positive version of this, which is even if you're struggling, you'll find your way back up into happier times eventually. And so I think if anything, I think the lesson is more to be able to handle those extremes and know that things will balance out over time. And so when something really good happens, obviously you'll lose excitement over that thing. And also when something bad happens, your sadness or regret or grief will lessen over time as well. And so I just want to highlight that it happens in both directions, both positively and negatively. And I do think, again, the primary point being try to be happy with what you have. I think many of things will lead to short-term emotions about how things are happening to you and how you feel about them. But trying to find things that will have a lasting impact on you, I think are important. One of the examples that he previously gave on trying to not chase after like material things is like it might force you to stay at a job you don't like. And I think thinking about a similar topic like financial independence, for instance, if you have enough wealth that you don't need to worry about whether you can pay your bills or pay your rent or buy food that week, that's likely going to make you feel so much better than having a fancy belt or a fancy purse or car or whatever it is. And those are things that the individuals, again, who should really matter to you, that will be more valuable to you and to them, and they should appreciate that more. Of, I'm sure the people who actually care about you as an individual would prefer that you are in a good place and that you don't have to worry than if you have the fanciest item or the fanciest gadget or whatever it is. And so, again, I think reconsider why you're, especially in materialistic fashions, spending money on whatever it is that you're spending it on. Is that really going to truly benefit you in the long term? I think another concept to this, I think, was by like Vicki Robbins, Your Money or Your Life. And the concept that was there was, what do you do in order to earn money is basically time and energy that you have. And so every time that you spend on something, you're basically trading it for time and energy that you have. So another way of thinking about this is like, let's say you make $10 an hour, just for simplicity purposes, and we'll ignore taxes as well to keep it very simple. If you go to buy something that's $10, you are giving up basically an hour of your life in the future or in the past, whichever way you want to think about it. And so that is the actual trade-off that's being made. And if you want to buy something that's $100, you're trading 10 hours of your time or your life for it. And so this is where you could potentially keep pursuing those things and keep giving up fractions and small fractions of your life over time. Or you could try to save those fractions of your life and maybe spend that time with your family doing things that you enjoy. And that could be a much more fulfilling way of doing things. With that said, obviously, a lot of what I've discussed so far is mostly on the frugal side. But I think one of the advantages of being frugal is that you can spend money where you think it's important. And this is where I think a lot of people get into trouble, is that I think Tom was the individual that he stated earlier. He's trying to show off in so many ways. Like he has a fancy gold watch, he wants to go party, he needs to do all these things. And for most individuals, you likely can splurge on particular items. Like if you are really into watches, for instance, like maybe your parents had a watch collection, or maybe they were like watchmakers or something, and like there's real sentimental value to that, then go for it. Spend a bunch of money on some watches. But what I think gets people a lot is that they feel like they need to expand that lifestyle out. I think going all the way back to that first example, um, of the red robe. So sometimes you feel like, okay, well, watches might be the actual thing that gives me happiness due to my background and whatever happened in my life previously. But then you're going to start spending it on clothing, on cars, on technology, whatever it is. And that's really where people get into trouble. And so this is where the more you can think and internalize and reflect on what actually makes you happy over time and what actually brings you joy over time, you're likely going to have a handful or two of things that come to mind, and everything else doesn't really matter. Like if you're really into coffee, for instance, like go to Starbucks, or well, Starbucks probably isn't the best place for coffee if that's really your thing, but like go to some niche brewery somewhere and like spend however much you want on a coffee every day, or on a special bag of coffee beans or whatever it is you're into. But that doesn't mean that you then also have to go and buy a fancy car that costs like $100,000. Um, and that's the trade-offs they have, which is if you save that money on the car, you can then basically live luxuriously in coffee or whatever it is that you're into. And I think that's one of the benefits that comes with being frugal in certain areas of your life, is you don't necessarily have to be frugal everywhere, but try to be frugal in the areas that don't really matter to you. And I think that's something that gets a lot of us and gets people into trouble, is trying to spend lavishly in every aspect of your life when really it's only going to matter in a few key areas.
Number 5, that being subtle and living within your means is so important is that, well, technically you could retire with less money. If you're able to spend less money as your baseline when it comes to retirement, you simply just won't need as much money to retire. According to the 4% rule, which I've talked about on this channel, you can technically call yourself retired when you're able to withdraw 4% from your nest egg every single year and live off of it. So if your lifestyle costs you $50,000 a year, you need a nest egg of $1.25 million, and this will allow you to withdraw $50,000 a year and live off of your investments. Imagine your lifestyle costs you $100,000 per year or double that, then you're going to need $2.5 million in order to withdraw at that same healthy 4% rate. So living below your means just helps bring down the burden of that financial stress, and it also means that you can take steps to eliminating debt if you do have debt. And one of the signs that you are going to be doing well financially is that if you're able to effectively manage your debt. The average American has personal debt, so excluding mortgages, of around $23,000 according to a recent study, with a lot of it coming on a credit card. Ideally, if we're living below our means and keeping a low profile, we're gonna be able to keep that amount much lower than that when it comes to our own debt. That way, we're able to manage the payments in a way that's not going to cut into the remainder of our lives. So I think I've effectively shown you all the benefits that a modest life and looking poor can give you today. I think it frees you up in so many ways financially that you will be happier, have more peace of mind, and cherish the things that actually matter. If you enjoyed this video, you'll really like this video right here on the 7 major differences between rich and poor people. It's one of my best recent videos, and I think you guys will probably agree with a lot of what's said in there. I'll see you guys in that video. Just seriously go click it now. And all right, thank you for being here. Peace.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw, please hit like or subscribe. I will see you around.